Good morning to you, Larry, and good morning on the Newsmaker Hotline to our good friend Joe DiGenova, our legal analyst. Joe, how are you this morning?
I'm doing just fine.
Well, we know that the United States Senate is about to pick up some gun legislation and see how far they can get down the path with it. There are questions about whether or not the votes are there for the legislation. But I read that the Supreme Court, as early as today, could make a decision about whether they want to take up a New York gun case. And basically, the case focuses around whether or not you have the right to carry a gun for self-defense outside of your own home. There are some 10 states where you're required to have proper cause, including the state of Maryland. What do you think about that, Joe?
Well, the Supreme Court in the Heller case ruling, which, as you know, was the first major ruling in decades on the Second Amendment, said you have a right to a gun in your home. And it left for future cases decisions about how far these gun rights extend. This may very well be the case which decides that. I think it's, the court is going to have to deal with these because it left so many questions unanswered, which it had to. It wasn't writing legislation. It was deciding a specific case about the District of Columbia licensing law. So, no way to tell which way they'll go. But, I mean, if you're honest about the Second Amendment and what it means, which it says you shall have the right to keep and bear arms, it is consistent with an intelligent reading of the Second Amendment to mean that you can carry it subject to certain restrictions. But we shall see.
Okay.
And also last week there was the story of the Mitch McConnell's campaign headquarters and the recording that took place down there. We actually finally got the bottom line on this. Allegedly, apparently, this was a third-party recording, which means no one involved in the actual conversation knew they were being taped or agreed to be taped, and
right.
That seems to be a clear violation of law, not only in Kentucky, but potentially federal law. My question to you, Joe, is, first of all, how do you pursue it if you're either a U.S. attorney or the local attorneys down there in Kentucky? And also, is there any culpability to Mother Jones? Now that we know that this is illegal, shouldn't Mother Jones, the website that first published this, shouldn't they remove it from the site?
Well, Mother Jones should do whatever it needs to do to protect itself legally, because they are, in fact, ultimately responsible for the publication of the illegal recording. It is now quite clear from all published reports that this was an unauthorized recording of a private meeting. And under Kentucky and U.S. law, that is illegal. It may be a felony. It may be a misdemeanor. It depends on a lot of things. The Bureau, the FBI, and the U.S. Attorney's Office there have started to interview people. They take this very, very seriously. The fact is, David Korn, the reporter for Mother Jones who got this, has potential criminal liability, as does Mother Jones. The mere fact that they have First Amendment rights to publish doesn't mean they can receive illegal information. They can certainly publish it, but then they remain liable for any legal consequences as a result of that publication.
Wow.
So both Mother Jones, David Korn, the people who made the recording, all of it have potential legal liability. Now, it may be that the people at Mother Jones will argue that they didn't know that this was illegally recorded. But the circumstances surrounding the recording make it quite clear that that argument is going to be quite unreasonable and unbelievable.
In fact, David Korn is on record as saying this. He said this did not come from a Watergate-style bugging operation.
Yes. Well,
so that suggests he knew something about how it was indeed recorded.
Indeed it does. And we'll see what happens henceforth.
Hey, listen, along the same lines, when you're talking about media law, you got this Fox reporter who, reported some stuff and is now being called before a grand jury and may be required to, will be asked at least to give up that information about who the source was. I can't imagine that the young reporter would want to do that. Have you been watching that story? It's sort of an interesting story.
Yeah, what's happened is the judge ruled the other day that he wasn't going to rule on whether or not she had to testify. He was going to wait to see what the evidence developed and whether or not the psychiatric report, which she was told about, is actually going to be admitted into evidence. If it is...
This has to do with the Colorado shooting.
That is correct.
Right.
The Aurora shooting.
Oh, so yeah, right.
If, in fact, he decides that the psychiatric report is going to be admitted, then he's going to have to deal with who it is violated the law by making it public, if they did at all. usually the courts have to exhaust all other alternatives of getting the information before they turn to the reporter. My guess is one of the law enforcement people who gave her this will eventually come forward because they'll be put under oath in a court of law, and they'll say, I gave it to her, and then her source will be revealed, and she won't have to go to prison.
Wow.
Joe, the immigration bill looks like it's going to be introduced tomorrow, and then it's 1,500 pages, they say. Have you seen any of the reporting on it? And from your legal perspective, from what you know and what's been leaked, is there any way to actually enforce this? I mean, we did a segment on this earlier in the show, and it seems like there's so much cynicism out there that we already have all these laws that aren't being enforced. Why introduce all these new laws that ultimately, based on whoever the president is, if they choose to, they won't enforce the new laws?
In 1986, we did this, and the border security was not enforced, and we went from 2 million amnesty-granted illegal immigrants to a new 11 to 20 million illegal immigrants that we are now going to legalize. The issue here is this is a 1,500-page bill. This harkens back memories of Obamacare. We have to pass the bill to know what's in it. They're going to hold one hearing in the United States Senate. Did you hear me? One hearing, and that's supposed to make sure that everybody in America, especially the senators, know what's in the bill. If this bill gets passed in the Senate, it's going to the House. And I hope the House has hearings to make the world marvel. They should have months of hearings. But that will depend on the leadership and whether or not they would rather pass a bill and sue for peace with the Latino community, which has hijacked the immigration process, or whether or not they're going to do their job and hold real hearings. The fact that the Senate is going to consider a bill with no hearings ought to be an embarrassment to the world's greatest deliberative body.
Yeah, well, and you got a gun legislation being considered. That they decided to proceed to consideration of gun legislation based on talking points when no bill had actually been written. But now we're getting a few details about the so-called Manchin-Toomey legislation. What do you think about that?
The answer is, once again, bad legislating in the Senate, trying to solve a problem with no hearings. It's an embarrassment that the Senate under Harry Reid and the Democrats has devolved into nothing more than a place where they take notes and then vote on the notes.
Yeah.
This is absolutely absurd. If this bill goes to the House, again, there will be tons of hearings, and this bill will not proceed until there has been sufficient hearings in the House of Representatives. The Democratic senators and the Democratic leaders in the Senate should be embarrassed about the way they are running a great institution. They are running it all right. They are running it into the ground.
All right, Joe DiGenova, thank you.
Tell us what you really think.
By the way, hey, Joe, should Tiger have been kicked off the Masters, by the way?
Absolutely should have been disqualified.
There you go!
And by the way, Weiner is the perfect guy to be mayor. He's mentally ill, couldn't get a gun, therefore he should be mayor.
All right, thank you, Joe DiGenova.
Wow.
Clearly,
he's on fire this morning.
He is, and he clearly listens to every segment of our shows, and we love that. All right, thanks, Joe. We'll see